This was the largest bombing since the start of the war in Ukraine. So, what exactly happened? Actually, the truth behind it is completely the opposite of what you might think. It might be hard for you to imagine. Also, Trump has halted the North American Free Trade Agreement. Well, it's not exactly halted, he just refused to agree to continue it in its current form. So, what does this mean for Canada and Mexico? And what does it mean for the United States? All right, there's a lot of news today. Welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fangway. Hello to all our viewers on YouTube. Hello to all our listeners on Hope Radio Silicon Valley FM 96.1. And to our new viewers, don't forget to subscribe. Every day we bring you the fastest updates on American news and international news related to the US, plus analysis of the stories behind the headlines. Today we have some in-depth analysis to discuss with everyone, so please make sure to watch until the end. And remember to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of Fangway's shows or future programs. All right, let's get straight to the point. During President Trump's first term, in 2020, he negotiated to scrap the North American Free Trade Agreement, the one Clinton signed in 1994. He replaced it with what's now called the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Then, on Wednesday, the United States Trade Representative's Office issued an official statement saying they do not agree to renew the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement in its current form. So, what's going on here? Let me first give you some background on this. The US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, known as the USMCA, is an acronym made up of the first letters of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It officially went into effect on July 1st, 2020, during Trump's first term. It's one of the few US foreign trade agreements that includes what's called a sunset clause. What does that mean? It means this agreement is only valid for 16 years, until July 1st, 2036, after which it will automatically expire. Unless the three countries agree to renew it before then, extending it for another 16 years. To prevent the agreement from simply running its course without oversight between now and 2036, the three countries agreed to conduct a joint review every 6 years. A committee made up of representatives from all three countries will review the agreement and decide each time whether to continue renewing it. This is stipulated in Article 34.7 of the agreement. So at the same time every sixth year, which was just yesterday, July 1st, 2026, the three parties held a meeting. They discussed and reviewed how the USMCA agreement has been functioning. Then the US announced they wouldn't renew the agreement. This doesn't mean it's immediately terminated. Instead, it moves to annual reviews. If it fails the following year's review, the agreement could then be officially terminated. So basically, this is the US firing a warning shot, saying, we don't want to play with you anymore. But there's still a year left for us to talk things over. So are you going to withdraw or not? That's the situation. Now, what's the reason behind this? After the US imposed high tariffs on Chinese goods, many Chinese companies moved their supply chains from China to Mexico and Canada. So Mexico and Canada, according to the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada, are basically the US's very close trading partners, and the tariffs are extremely low. So now these close trading partners have become a channel for the Chinese Communist Party to ship goods in. This is what it's called. A transit point or transit country for products, which has made President Trump very dissatisfied. He has long been saying that he doesn't want to renew the USMCA and instead prefers to impose high tariffs on cars, steel, and aluminum products from Canada and Mexico. In other words, what used to be zero tariffs for you, your good buddy is treating you like an outsider. Yeah, that's the situation. These three countries together account for nearly 1/3 of the world's gross domestic product, and the trade volume within this region has already exceeded $1.6 trillion in 2024. So what was their trade volume when they signed the agreement 6 years ago? It was only $1 trillion. That means in the past 4 years, it has increased by more than 60%. And as for Canada, exports to the United States account for what percentage of its total foreign trade exports? 72%. And for Mexico, it's even higher, up to 80%. So if the USMCA were to say today, we're not going to renew under the previous terms, we'll review it every year. So if, after these reviews, the agreement really does get terminated, then both the Canadian and Mexican economies would face major problems and experience a rapid decline. Even now, the US is still imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico, right? For Mexico, it's what, 5%, right? And for Canada, it's 35%. But these only apply to goods outside of the USMCA. For Canadian exports to the US, these tariffs affect less than 20% of their total exports. So in reality, the core interests haven't really been touched. If after the USMCA expires and during the annual review, it actually gets scrapped, That would mean the entire economic landscape of North America would have to be reshuffled. We all know that, across the Americas, Trump's so called Trump doctrine, the first and most important region is the Western Hemisphere, then comes the Asia Pacific, then the Middle East, and finally Europe. And now, in just a year and a half, most countries in South America have already become US allies. Only Brazil is left. But now, North America has actually become an opponent of Trump's America. Whether it's Mexico or Canada, both are governed by left wing parties, which are ideologically opposed to Trump's way of governing. So now it's really like a major shift in the balance of power. Just like that, in only a year and a half, things have changed so much. And what about all of South America? With right wing governments in power, it's like a domino effect. As for Canada, it's now in a bit of a confrontational stance with the US, just like Mexico is with the US. But can they really hold out? All right, now let's talk about another piece of news. So on Wednesday, yesterday, Trump specifically went to Mandan, North Dakota, to attend the opening ceremony of the Theodore Roosevelt Library. It was pretty interesting. On his way there were police cars all along the route, and there were also local mounted police, what they call the mounted patrol, riding alongside. They were clearing the way for him, kind of recreating the scene from back in the day. Trump really likes that whole Western cowboy vibe, horses, mountain police, that sort of thing. Anyway, at the opening ceremony, Trump once again criticized the decision to hand over the Panama Canal back in the day, because the Panama Canal was Theodore Roosevelt's achievement. At the time, he used tough diplomacy to support Panama's independence and secure for the United States the rights to build and control the canal. Then, from 1904 to 1914, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers overcame challenges like yellow fever in the deadly tropical rainforest to create this engineering marvel. It took 10 years and was completed in 1914. After it was finished, the voyage from New York to San Francisco no longer had to go through the tip of South America, which shortened the journey by 8,000 miles. Since then, it has become one of the busiest and most strategically important shipping routes in the world. Every year, about 5% of global shipping and maritime trade passes through the Panama Canal, with the value of goods involved reaching around $270 billion. In addition, it handles 40% of the United States' container shipping volume. In 1977, President Carter signed what was called the Torrijos-Carter Treaties, agreeing to transfer control and sovereignty of the Panama Canal back to Panama. Of course, at that time, this was considered politically correct during the anti-colonial movement era. Yeah, everything was given back to them. But the Panama Canal wasn't something the US took over through some colonial war. It was actually built by the US Army Corps of Engineers. So this was something Trump really disagreed with. Then, in 1999, according to that 1977 treaty, Clinton fulfilled the agreement and handed over full control of this strategic waterway to Panama. So yesterday, Trump said at the Theodore Roosevelt Library, "We just gave away the Panama Canal like that." And the first thing Beijing did was raise the toll fees by 4 times, but not a single ship stopped coming. Then they raised the price 2 more times, and still not a single ship was lost. Over the years, they've made huge profits. I think what he meant was Li Ka-shing's company, right? So Trump said, this was just incredibly stupid, wasn't it? And now Trump says the Chinese Communist Party is trying to take over the Panama Canal, and we will absolutely not let that happen. Do you understand? And finally, let me ask again, do you understand? So President Trump's policy is very clear. All right, now let's take a look at the situation in Iran. The spokesperson for Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the negotiations between the US and Iran held in Doha have made positive progress. But what kind of progress? They didn't say anything specific. And they also said that the next round of negotiations will continue to move forward based on the so-called Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, which was reached at the summit in Switzerland. The next round will be held after the funeral of Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei. When is his funeral? July 9th, about a week from now. So now the Iranian government is basically forcing all Iranians to come out and participate to show that the authorities have control over the people's hearts and minds. But at the same time, a lot of things are happening in Iran. One of them is the many issues reported today with Iranian banks. Since June 13th, customers of several Iranian banks have said that their mobile banking services have been having problems. At that time, Iran's central bank said it was because someone was attacking the bank's infrastructure online. Now, more than 2 weeks have passed, and the problem still hasn't been resolved. If you have an account at the bank, you still can't access it on your phone. So one customer said that on the 28th, he transferred 50 million rials from one bank to another. I don't even know how much 50 million rials is in US dollars. The money was clearly deducted from his account on this side, but it never arrived at the other bank. Another retiree from Tehran said that after the banking system went down, the 500 million rials in his bank account just vanished without a trace, and the bank didn't give any explanation. So there are a lot of problems happening within Iran's economy. Another bizarre thing is that a hardline member of parliament named Ghazafari kept saying that President Pezeshkian and his allies are trying to marginalize the supreme leader, Khamenei, by strengthening the Supreme National Security Council, and the parliament systematically stripping the supreme leader of his powers. This member of parliament said that their plan is to make the Supreme National Security Council the only decision-making body in the country. He called this a political coup. He accused them of having the parliament adjourned for 4 months to prevent members from opposing this power grab. But anyway, whether this is true or not, we don't really know, just sharing it with everyone. All right, now I need to tell you about what is actually today's most important news. Russia has launched the largest airstrike since the start of the war. Here's the situation with Russia. In the early hours of July 2nd, Russia carried out the largest airstrike on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, since the full-scale invasion began, deploying a total of 570 missiles and attack drones. You could really call it a relentless bombardment. According to a follow-up report from the Ukrainian Air Force, the Russian military launched 74 missiles of various types and 496 attack drones in a single night. So what about Ukraine's air defense forces? They successfully intercepted or suppressed 48 missiles and 476 drones, but 25 ballistic missiles and 12 drones still hit a total of 33 locations. It's already known that this bombing has caused at least 28 deaths across Ukraine, with 17 of those in Kyiv alone. Sometimes, high-rise buildings and apartment complexes were hit, and at least 90 more people were injured, including frontline rescue workers and innocent women and children. So now it's like this. The background of this whole situation, is it because Russia has suddenly become so powerful? Actually, that's not the case, because just a week ago, Zelensky had already called for both sides to stop deep strikes, but Putin refused. Then, Ukraine began launching its own version of deep strikes on a large scale, not only targeting the capital and key facilities near Moscow, but also attacking oil refineries and supporting oil pipelines throughout central and western Russia. There are also substations, semiconductor factories, communication centers, and munitions factories. Now, Ukrainian drones have a deep strike range with an attack diameter of over 3,000 kilometers. So they can cover almost all areas of Russia west of Siberia. The destruction of infrastructure in Crimea has even caused a large number of people to flee the region. So actually, in this situation, just the day before yesterday, Putin himself came out and called for, as previously stated, not to carry out deep strikes. Previously, when Zelensky called for this, he refused, but just a week later, he said he would implement it. Clearly, this is a sign of weakness. So under these circumstances, the Russian military is now in a very unfavorable position. Just how unfavorable it is, I'll explain to everyone in a moment. But regardless, in the current situation, it's generally believed that the Russian military's large-scale deep strikes are actually a response to Putin's peace overtures, using fighting to push for negotiations and to gain more bargaining chips at the table. On the other side of Putin's seemingly aggressive stance are the U.S. think tanks, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, and the Institute for the Study of War. On July 1st, they released a new research report, which presents a different perspective on the Russia-Ukraine war from a technical standpoint. Well, how should I put it? According to this report from February 2022, when the full-scale Russian invasion began, up until the end of last month in June, the total number of Russian military casualties on the battlefield, including those killed, wounded, and missing, has reached 1.4 million. Among them, as many as 400,000 to 450,000 have been confirmed killed in action. In the early stages of the war, the casualty ratio between the Russian and Ukrainian forces was roughly maintained at 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. But in the first half of this year, that ratio shifted dramatically, skyrocketing to an unprecedented 8-to-1. In 2026, the Russian army is expected to suffer heavy casualties on the front lines every month, with losses ranging from 30,000 to 34,000 people. However, domestically, the monthly recruitment capacity for new soldiers is only about 27,000. In other words, Russia's war machine is facing a serious manpower deficit every month. What's even more severe is the complete paralysis of the logistics lines. In other words, the supply lines. In June 2026 alone, Ukraine destroyed a total of 12,900 Russian fuel trucks and fuel depots, which is nearly 4 times the number during the same period in the past. As a result, a large number of Russian soldiers at the front have been forced to walk 30 kilometers on foot to transport ammunition, facing this kind of predicament. The report also points out that on several fronts in eastern Ukraine, the Russian army's daily advance has shrunk to just 50 to 90 meters per day. This is the slowest rate of advance in any war over the past century. Not only that, but Russia's territorial control has actually seen a net decrease this spring, with Ukraine reclaiming 400 square kilometers of land. So, the battlefield situation between Russia and Ukraine has already reversed. It's under these circumstances that Putin has launched the largest and deepest airstrike since the war began. So, what will happen next? Will there be peace talks? Let's just wait and see. Okay, now let's talk about the Chinese Communist Party. In March of this year, the National People's Congress passed a law called the Law on the Promotion of National Unity and Progress, or simply the National Unity Law. It will go into effect on July 1st, and it has drawn attention from many sides, especially from the United States. 14 bipartisan U.S. senators immediately voiced their opposition and sent a joint letter to Secretary of State Blinken. The letter stated that the core of this national unity law is to strengthen the consciousness of the Chinese national community, but in reality, it is a policy of forced assimilation, targeting Tibetans, Uyghurs, Southern Mongolians, as well as Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other ethnic minorities. This policy is being legalized and expanded. The Chinese Communist Party is carrying out a forced assimilation campaign targeting non-Han ethnic communities. At the same time, because there are 2 provisions in this law that claim to hold organizations or individuals within China legally accountable for violations, it is clear that they are attempting to exercise extraterritorial jurisdiction over speech and actions outside of China. It has been criticized as legalizing transnational repression that Western countries would never tolerate. Today, the U.S. State Department made a statement saying that this law is problematic. It imposes the broad political agenda of the Chinese Communist Party on individuals, institutions, and organizations within China. Otherwise, they risk retaliation from the authorities. However, the State Department said that the United States rejects this and will absolutely defend its sovereignty and protect individuals within its borders from attempts at intimidation, harassment, harm, coercion, and silencing. These are overreaches by foreign governments and regimes. In other words, they won't let the Chinese Communist Party interfere. As for the Australian government, it has already lodged a protest with Beijing regarding this law. They believe that this could potentially restrict the rights and freedoms of individuals outside of China. There's also a little story from a small country, because the foreign minister of this small country, New Zealand's Foreign Minister Peters, also stated that this law has no legal effect in New Zealand, so he isn't worried. He said the Chinese Communist Party can make such claims, but that doesn't mean they can actually enforce them. Whether it's in Singapore, Australia, the UK, the US, or anywhere else, this law has no legal effect. Then a reporter asked him, "Will you protest to the Chinese Communist Party about this?" He replied, "Since it has no legal effect, why should I protest?" What he meant was there's simply no need to pay any attention to it. It's all the same, just white grains, so that's the situation. In addition, the official account of the US Embassy in China recently issued 2 travel warnings for China. Let me tell you about them. The first one is about online privacy. How should I put it? In China, including American visitors to China, that is, even us Chinese Americans, when using mobile networks or other networks, you can't expect any privacy protection. What does that mean? It means that when you use the internet in China, everything you do can be seen by others. The authorities can see everything, okay? The second warning is about religious activities in China. If you participate in any religious activities that have not been approved by the government, including private prayer meetings or Bible study groups and the like, you could face fines, detention, arrest, or even deportation. So this is exactly why the US State Department has been constantly warning Americans traveling to China to pay attention to their safety in this regard. Of course, the biggest group affected is people like us. Chinese people, especially those with foreign citizenship visiting China, must be careful. Relations are deteriorating as China becomes more nationalistic and aggressive. Everyone needs to pay attention. Now, let's dive into today's controversial topic. Citizen Vigilante is a 2026 Croatian German co production exploring vigilante justice, where individuals take the law into their own hands. It's a vigilante action thriller, and the main character is the person you see on the screen. His name is Sanders. The story revolves around a group of teenage immigrants. This woman, however, is denied justice by the court, so she decides to fight violence with violence. She personally takes up a gun to hunt down and kill the immigrant criminal, wipes out the criminal's entire family, kills the judge, and even takes out the entire SWAT team that tries to arrest her. This story is actually based on a true event, a real case that happened in Hamburg, Germany in 2016. A group of young teenagers of Middle Eastern descent, immigrants, and a 14-year-old girl were involved. However, after the incident, the perpetrator was only given a suspended sentence. So they got off scot-free? Of course, in the real story, there was no vigilante justice. That part didn't happen. The case itself is real, and after this film came out, it became a huge hit. It reached #1 among paid films on Amazon, expressing the public's outrage at Europe's current tendency to cater to Middle Eastern immigrants, even to the point of tolerating their crimes and the failure of the justice system. However, because this film is extremely politically incorrect, it was immediately banned in Germany and later banned across Europe. They wouldn't grant it a license, so it couldn't be shown in theaters. So the only places it could be released were the United States and Canada. Because it was blocked in Europe, really blocked, the director, named Ball, decided to upload the entire film to X for a limited time free screening. As a result, Elon Musk saw it. He publicly posted in support and shared it, which led to what you'd call viral spread. In just 2 or 3 days, the global viewership reached tens of millions. This also turned the film from a low budget movie into a political topic. The film apparently only cost $750,000 to make, so it was produced on a very small budget. Moving on, the reviews are extremely polarized. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film actually has a pretty good reputation, and now, because it's available for free on the X platform, it's being watched by countless people. Have you seen it? If you haven't, I have to warn you, it's very violent. A lot of people feel it's really satisfying to watch, but many others criticize it for being anti immigrant. As for my own opinion, I both agree and have criticisms. I posted about it on X. My account is SOA, which stands for So Fangway. If you haven't already, please give me a follow, okay? I often post there and share different perspectives, but as a result, 90% of the readers criticized me, and even so, in today's show, I'm going to stir up this hornet's nest again. Actually, it's not really stirring up a hornet's nest. In fact, a lot of the criticism from readers has been good for me. I've looked at it carefully and thought about it deeply. The reason I want to talk about this topic again is because in the United States, public debate is one of the most valuable things. In America, you won't get in trouble just for what you say. That's what makes America so precious. In Europe, if you say something out of line, the police might show up at your door, but that absolutely doesn't happen in the United States.